Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Back at the very beginning of the year, way back, the first programme of the Richie Allen Show after Christmas, I spoke with the families of Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey. It's fair to say most people listening to this programme now will know whom they are. They're the victims of one of the most grievous miscarriages of justice maybe in US history. And I can't say that enough. I happened upon the documentary series by accident over the Christmas break because I do subscribe to Netflix. I'm not endorsing it at all, but I do subscribe to it. And I came across this story of these two men, these cousins, whom were fitted up for a murder they didn't commit. Stephen Avery's own backstory in itself is terrifying, what happened to that man. Late last year, we spoke with Shaun Attwood. Now, you all know who Shaun Attwood is. He's the author of Prison Time, Hard Time, of course, and Party Time, amongst other books. And I will tweet out links to those books and where you can find him. His website is ShaunAttwood.com. He does a lot these days to shine light again on injustice around the world. And he talks to children's groups about the negative consequences of drugs and crime. And he talks at length about his experiences in a US prison. We talked last time he was on, of course, about Sheriff Joe Arpaio and the experiences that he had in his jail for distributing ecstasy. It's a real pleasure to welcome back to the programme Shaun Attwood. And it really is, Shaun. Thanks for coming back on, my friend. It's been a few months, but it's great to have you back on again. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, Richie. Thanks for having me back on so soon.
Not at all. It could have been sooner as well. Remember, folks, I want to give you these details now. To find out more about Shaun and where to buy his books, and his books are outstanding reads, they really are, go to ShaunAttwood.com. Shaun, you spoke to me quite a bit around about the time that I was chasing down, and you helped me, of course, it must be said, and I did mention that at the time, chase down the families of Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey. It's fair to say that there's never been, at least I don't know of, a documentary series made by a major television network that's had the impact as Making a Murderer. It's absolutely gripped everybody who's seen it. And it's kind of changed the course of your life. And I don't think I'm being dramatic in saying that. I mean, you've had an amazing life and you do a lot of amazing work with children through your own activism. But this lit a fire under you, this particular documentary series. Tell us about that.
Well, I've been ranting and raving about the injustice in the American system for years. Not as an excuse for my crimes. I was stupid enough to put myself in there. But just articulating the situation for a lot of the people that I saw who were in there. Guys on death row. My lawyer got a guy off death row who'd been on there for 10 years, stitched up, similar manner to Stephen Avery. And they tried to execute him multiple times, and the actual perpetrator had been behind bars, and my lawyer sued the state to release the DNA. They found out who the perpetrator was, and this guy got released, but he'd almost been executed multiple times, innocent man. And DNA evidence now is showing hundreds of guys have been set up all across America, including loads on death row.
Loads on death row. I'm trying to think, while you're talking there, it rings a bell with me. A gentleman who founded Resurrection After Exoneration is somebody whom I've spoken to before, and heaven forgive me now for not recalling his name off the top of my head, but he was on death row for years and came within days of being executed as well. And what was discovered, Shaun, was that the district attorney who had basically put him away many, many years ago knew of blood evidence that would have exonerated him. How evil does it get, Shaun, to be a district attorney, to be prosecuting a man, and you find out that the man you're prosecuting couldn't have done it, and yet for political reasons, for scorekeeping reasons, for targets, whatever, you say, well, feck that, I'm going to go ahead with it anyway. It's sickening, isn't it?
It's state-sanctioned murder, and what the police and the prosecutors do, the police will go out and grab a black guy with some criminal history because the racism in the system is off the scale, and they'll put him up in court. They'll give him $5,000 or $10,000 for a public defender, and we saw how that went down in Making a Murderer.
Yeah,
they worked for the state, and then the state will spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions, prosecuting that person. And at the end of the day, it's 2 theatre shows, and whoever puts on the best theatre show wins. and the state has the most money. And that's exactly what you saw with Making a Murderer and Ken Kratz. Everything to Ken Kratz was just like a prop in his theatre production.
Yeah, do you know, halfway through episode 1 or 2 of Making a Murderer, Caroline and myself were thinking it was a spoof documentary. We actually thought it was a spoof.
Right.
And you know, I've said that to one or two people, and they've made me feel a bit kind of sane and a bit normal, because they've said, yeah, Richie, we thought the same. We thought this is a wind-up. This couldn't happen. It's got to be fiction. You know, they couldn't... A county, Manitowoc County, could not do what they've done to Stephen Avery twice. And this is what people couldn't get their heads around watching it. Is that Stephen Avery is now in prison for the rest of his life for a murder that he didn't commit. We'll talk about that in a second. But he was sentenced to prison basically for life for having raped a woman called Penny Bernstein, whom he didn't. And they knew he didn't when they arrested him. They knew he didn't when they prosecuted him. And they left him rot in jail for years and years and years until he came out in 2003, I think, 2004. I think it was 2003. But for the same justice system, the same county, to do it again to him. That's why I began to think initially over the Christmas, you know, you're isolated, you're at home, I'm not online. I'm thinking this is a wind-up, this. And it's not a wind-up. This is actually happening to this man.
I can understand where you're coming from about the wind-up, because they framed this guy not professionally. It was such poorly done frame job. They were so confident they would get away with it and no one would ever look at this case. They didn't even do it in a professional manner. It's just so ridiculously obvious what they're doing. But the justice system is such that the odds are now stacked against him, because the appeal procedure takes up to 5 years, you know, to get back into the court system to try and undo all of this.
Shall we give the basics to our listeners who maybe haven't yet seen it? And folks, listen, I don't endorse Netflix. I doubt Shaun would endorse any television company either. But to see this, it's worth doing it. Maybe you can get a download of it, maybe on YouTube, I don't know. But Stephen Avery was convicted of the assault of Penny Bernstein back in 1985. He didn't do it. He absolutely didn't do it. He was in prison for 18 years. He had multiple alibis, by the way. There was no DNA evidence. There was nothing. The Innocence Project and a lot of other people helped him get out and prove that he couldn't have done it. But it proved a lot more than that, didn't it, Shaun? It proved that they already had a suspect that they knew more than likely did it. But they went after Stephen Avery and he spent 18 years in prison. When he was released, he filed a $36 million civil lawsuit against Manitowoc County and county officials over the conviction because of malfeasance beyond belief, right? Beyond belief. Not long after this, and this really is the synopsis now, by the way, he was accused of murdering a woman called Teresa Halbach. She's a photographer who used to pop round to their car lot to photograph cars and that were going to be sold. They eventually convicted Stephen and his young cousin Brendan Dassey for the murder of Teresa Halbach, despite there not being a single shred of physical evidence to tie them to the crime. They said she was murdered basically in his trailer. They couldn't find a drop of blood. They couldn't find DNA. They couldn't find anything. They planted a key. I'm jumping ahead now by saying they planted a key, but they did. They planted the key of her car in his property, despite 5 or 6 searches having turned nothing up. Eventually, Manitowoc County sheriffs, who were told to stay away from the search because they were compromised, they should recuse themselves because, of course, they were part of his first conviction, which was quashed. They went and searched anyway, which is a gross violation of proper procedure. They planted a key. These guys are in prison for the rest of their lives. I've done a reasonable job there, Shaun, but you might want to add 1 or 2 things in there.
Yeah, absolutely. They said that he'd kidnapped and raped and slashed this woman's neck and shot her in the head, and there wasn't a shred of credible DNA evidence in his trailer. And they said that was because, obviously, one of them had some bleach on his jeans. They'd used bleach to clean up all the DNA. It's like the cameras went in there and this place was so dirty. There was deer blood and all kinds of grit and grime. And basically the prosecutor was just making up as he was going along. So there was no credible DNA. There was no murder weapon. There was no alternative suspect list. Within 3 hours of her being reported missing, They already had Stephen Avery filed on the computer as the main suspect, and they hadn't even found a body yet.
And this is a guy whom they had a lot to gain in terms of, they had a lot to gain out of accusing him or him being found guilty of murder, because he was suing them for 36 million, 18 million, $1 million for each year he was in prison in the wrong for a sexual assault he didn't commit, and 18 million in punitive damages he was going after. And Shaun, you know, you never know the way court cases are going to go, but it's fair to say, as the depositions were being taken, and we saw in the documentary some of the depositions of some of the Manitowoc officials and how bad they were at telling lies in the deposition, it's fair to say he would have won that case.
Yes, and the other thing, the financial thing that hasn't come out, is that Sheriff Herman was running an auto salvage yard in competition with the Averys. So when the Averys' name was trashed by his deputies and the prosecutor, the business then all started to move over to his salvage yard, and the revenue now is up in the millions.
And this didn't come out in the documentary series, at least I don't remember it coming out anyway, or did it?
No, it didn't. The Avery yard was the go-to yard. They were known as down-to-earth, friendly business people when it came to the salvage yard. And Herman was in competition with them. So as Stephen Avery fell, the Herman yard, their financial fortune rose in proportion to the fall of the Averys. Because,
of course, if people believe that a young woman was murdered by a lunatic, well, they're not going to go and use the yard. And tell us about that, Shaun. I mean, I know you won't have the answers to all these questions. Don't worry about that. But presumably the Avery family business is in dire straits now.
I don't know exactly the financial status of it, but as far as I'm aware, because the first victim that they alleged, the rape victim, was a pillar of the community and her husband was a pillar of the community, that was the beginning of the descent of the Avery name. And still a lot of the local people supported Stephen after he was exonerated. But once Ken Kratz used the manipulated testimony of a mentally challenged 16-year-old, as in Brendan Dassey, Stephen Avery's nephew, all these questions were asked and answers basically planted in this kid's mouth. The prosecutor took some select sentences from that, did a press conference, headline news, basically saying that these guys had raped and mutilated and tortured and murdered and slashed her wrist and shot her in the head and she wouldn't die when her throat was cut and all this stuff. That turned around the local support, the last bastion of the local support that they had. That pretty much crushed it right there.
You know, most of us are not familiar with the law. You are very familiar with it. I know you're a layman, but you're very familiar with it because you've had your own dealings with it. But most of us know a few basics. Is that when a prosecutor does a press conference about a murder, or a district attorney does a press conference about a murder, he or she must be incredibly careful not to prejudice the community against anybody, because they've obviously got to draw a jury from that city, that community, that town, whatever, a fair and impartial jury. And what Ken Kratz did by spinning that Wes Craven, Edgar Allan Poe type story that he did, was he basically said that, you know, we have these two guys, they're guilty. Let me tell you what it is that they actually did. There was no way in hell that they could ever get a trial, you know, within 1,000 miles of Manitowoc County, that, you know, where you could draw a jury who didn't have any preconceptions about who they were or what happened.
Completely contaminated the jury pool.
Yeah.
The trial was retained within that jurisdiction, and then members of the jury were related to the sheriff's deputies and people who worked at the sheriff's office. There was a father of a sheriff's deputy, and I've spoke to one of the jurors, Juror 11, who was excused on Facebook, and he said that the father was threatening other jurors, was threatening him and saying that Stephen Avery was guilty and these people are just low-level trash and, you know, the whole Avery family, and he needs to be sent down. And the whole thing was manipulated through the jury as well.
If you're just joining the programme, Shaun Attwood is on. Go to Shaun's website, ShaunAttwood.com. Find his books there, Prison Time, Party Time, Hard Time, terrific books. Really, really well researched books, of course. There's a lot of his own personal experience in his writing, Shaun. He spends a lot of time now talking to youngsters. about drugs and about crime and about lots of other things besides. A terrific public speaker. As I said, ShaunAttwood.com. We're talking about the Netflix documentary, I won't say series, however, I believe there is a second season in the planning at the moment. Laura Ricciardi made the documentary series. We've put out a call to Laura to come on this programme, but we've not had any joy so far, but we will. It's all about two Wisconsin men, Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey, whom undoubtedly, without any shadow of a doubt, there's no doubt here whatsoever, we know we're not being subjective here. You cannot be subjective and you cannot be objective. These men are the victims of one of the most heinous, disgusting and malevolent miscarriages of justice there's ever been ever, because men and women in uniform charged with protecting the public good have gone after this man and his family over 30 years. Fitted him up for a rape he didn't commit. He spent 18 years for that. When he came out, he was going to absolutely nail them for what they did to him in a $36 million civil lawsuit. Before you know it, he's accused of murdering a woman in his trailer and using his 16-year-old cousin to help him do that. As Shaun described there, it couldn't have happened because even the greatest Mossad, CIA or MI6 agent could not clean a bedroom in a trailer as well as these guys were supposed to have cleaned it, to completely remove any trace of DNA in there. It couldn't happen. It just couldn't happen. It's as simple as that. They've targeted the man, they've targeted his family. Shaun told you there about the horrendous interrogation of Brendan Dassey outside the presence of a legal advisor, of his mother, outside the presence of a lawyer. A mentally challenged 16-year-old kid who had problems, whom they basically coerced into going along with a fairy story. Because if I'm right, Shaun, in the ridiculous hours-long interrogation of Brendan believed, God love him in his simplicity, is that if I tell these guys whatever they want to hear, they'll let me go home for my tea.
Well, he thought he was going to get home to watch WrestleMania and go back to school. How sad is that? Another thing is the bones. I believe the answer to this whole crime lies in the bones.
They're supposed to have burned the corpse of Thurs, aren't they? They're supposed to have set it on fire and burned it.
In a bonfire outside of Stephen Avery's trailer, and to have heat to the level that was required to do the damage to those bones, you would have had to have crematorium level heat. Not only that, the bones were found in 3 separate places. There was some in a quarry, I think, about half a mile away. So it was obvious that they'd been burnt in the quarry and moved outside of Stephen Avery's property, because if Stephen Avery had killed this woman, he would have put the bones somewhere else. He wouldn't have left them right on his doorstep. I mean, and again, this is just how idiotic and unprofessional this whole frame job is.
And of course, Stephen, God love him again, and this is in no way to put him down or to insult him, but Stephen is no Einstein either.
No.
You know, he's a gentleman of minimal education, simple. They're simple people. I mean, they are, and I feel very bad saying that because I'm no genius either. But they are simple people. You know, they're a clannish people. You know, a good family. They had a good name in the business that they did. Yeah, Stephen had 1 or 2 silly scrapes when he was younger. A lot of people have, but nothing. You know, nothing. They could never foresee what was going to happen to them and what could happen to him. Chris tweets us that Dr. Phil had a Making a Murderer special recently, and Dr. Phil, whom I don't know much about other than he looks a bit silly, some sort of a psychologist who has a TV programme. When I say looks a bit silly, he deals in simple absolutes and slogans, really doesn't dig down into anything. But apparently he told the viewers to stop calling the Manitowoc Police County Sheriff's Department and complaining. That's lovely. Yeah, let's just shut up about it and excuse my language, Shaun. Fuck them, you know. Let them rot in jail, you know. Why not, you know? Jane is tweeting us. She's horrified by this. How diabolical. I thought it couldn't get any worse. But the fact the sheriff was in competition with the business, you couldn't make it up. And that's the thing, of course, you couldn't make it up. Shaun, tell us about, there are a couple of things. People on this side of the pond are really getting interested in this. And there are protests and there are meetings and awareness events to make people aware of it, which I want you to talk about in a second as well. But since Making a Murderer, Is there any movement amongst the, let's say, the celebrity community? Is anybody banging the drum for these guys? Or is it dying down now that the documentary's been out there for 4 months?
Yeah, I mean, numerous major celebrities, Ricky Gervais included, have been making comments and tweeting on it and stuff like that. I think it has died down a bit, the commentary, as most people watched it over the Christmas period. But Miriam from Harry Potter, she's going to be one of the actresses coming to the demonstration that we're doing in London on April 2nd.
Brilliant. And you sent me an article in the Daily Mirror today, didn't you?
Yes.
So the Mirror seemed to have shown a bit of interest in it, and they seem to be doing regular pieces and regular features on it. The Mirror more than anybody else, I think.
Yeah, the Mirror has been like the elephant at the front leading this, the media on the stories, because in America there's been a backlash, and the mainstream media, a lot of them, are supporting Ken Kratz. Ken Kratz is going around doing all these interviews, touting his new book, and, you know, saying that they're completely guilty and they deserve to rot in hell, basically. And I've done some videos on him, and he did a verbal attack on me as well for outing his not just sexting, but also there are allegations that he did physically rape women as well, vulnerable women who are involved in the court system. He was sexted a victim of domestic violence, sexted a law student. The victim of domestic violence, her boyfriend had near choked her to death or something like that, and then Kratz went after her sexually. That's the kind of character of this guy.
Yeah, he's sinister, and he's out there doing these speeches, as you said, and he's basically telling the same pack of lies that he told at the initial press conference. Alex was on to say at least Brendan's evidence should have been thrown out the window. Mid-Atlantic, they scared it out of him. Even people who think they're guilty should see that the case was biased and not fair and objective. It needs a retrial. Now, of course, this is the problem. The way the law works, and this is kind of nationwide in the United States, but we can only talk about Wisconsin. There won't be any trial unless any new evidence can be introduced. Is there any hope at all? Is there any truth to the rumours that new evidence has surfaced since making a murderer, evidence that could get a retrial or a new trial for Stephen Avery?
Okay, there's two ways to get a retrial. There's new evidence and there's advancements in technology. And Kathleen Zellner, who's been regularly tweeting, she is the new lawyer. She's claiming to have both new evidence and advancements in technology have given her some new information. She's not released the details of those yet, but we're all waiting with bated breath to see what's going to happen next.
Do you think she's credible?
I think she's credible, yes. Lawyers generally err on the side of caution. So to be actually putting statements like that on the internet, she most certainly has the goods to back that up.
What about senators and congressmen and women? I mean, everybody is seeing this. We know this. This is about the most interesting television serial drama or documentary. It is a documentary, of course, that's been on the air for years and years and years. So we know that lawmakers, politicians will have seen it. Is anybody senior coming out to say, listen, I'm embarrassed to be an American. This has to be opened wide up again?
No, the opposite. The American lawmakers and politicians err on the side of being tough on crime and criminals. So anything that's showing sympathy towards a convicted murderer they perceive as would lose them votes. But because the public has come out so unanimously supportive of Stephen and Brendan Dassey, you would think that there would be intense pressure on these people now to change that. And the other thing is as well, the establishment view any kind of exposure of police corruption as a threat to the status quo. So that's why a lot of the mainstream media has been backing up people like Ken Kratz and saying that Netflix left things out.
Yeah, but they didn't leave anything out.
They didn't. Well, you know what? Now that I've looked at it closely, they left a lot out. They left a lot more information out that shows these guys are completely innocent.
Yeah. And of course, that's down to, I've never made a television documentary. I've made radio documentaries for commercial radio, and it's difficult in the cut. You know, I'd have to see that before I could be critical of Laura Ricciardi. But we have heard, haven't we, that she's allegedly working on making a Murderer Part 2, where maybe some of this stuff will come to light.
Yeah, and I think that would be great. I can't wait to see it.
So what can, this might sound a bit stupid, Shaun, you know, if politicians and lawmakers in the US don't care because, as you quite rightly said, and I believe you're absolutely right, to say they want to preserve the status quo and they don't want, you know, the public getting wind of the fact that massive miscarriages of justice can take place, not because of a mistake or because of an accident, but because of malfeasance and corruption and pure evil. And I agree with you. What can, some of our listeners now might be saying, we love Shaun Attwood. It was great when he was on talking about his own programme. But what the hell can we do about this? We've got our own problems in this country. How can we be of help to these two men?
Well, there are big support sites on Facebook. The family have got a Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey support site. The Stephen Avery Project has got over 100,000 followers now. The original family site was it was up to 70,000 followers, and it was hijacked by Ken Kratz supporters, who have completely destroyed that site, and I've got barred from it since they took over. And then there's, you know, I've put all kinds of videos on my YouTube channel as to how you can write to these guys in prison.
Give us your YouTube channel address now, my friend.
Okay, my YouTube is just under my name, Shaun, Shaun, Attwood, Att Wood. I've got videos on how to write to them, how to send them money through the inmate store, and how to support them in all various ways, because you can't just go out and buy a present and send it to these guys in prison. You can't just send a letter to them without following all the prison rules. A lot of people wrote to these guys in prison, didn't put the prison number on the envelope or return address, and all that mail got returned.
Folks, if you want to read something important that you know, gives you an idea of what we're talking about here, check out Hard Time, a Brit in America's Toughest Jail, by Shaun Attwood, and his other books as well. You can go to ShaunAttwood.com, look for him under Shaun, Shaun Attwood on YouTube, and you'll find his channel there. No doubt, mate, we'll be talking about this again, and we'll have you back on again anyway.
And if anyone's interested in the London demo...
Oh, the London demo, yeah.
That's going to be the early birds. It's April 2nd, 11 a.m. outside the US Embassy, and then the main event is 2 p.m. Parliament Square. And I've sent you the link for that, Richie, with all the addresses and the time. So perhaps if you could put that out, people could get all the concrete information from that. I
certainly will. I've got it. I've got it here, so I'll tweet it out there now shortly. It's the link. Wait now. What did you send me? You sent me the Mirror story. But before that, you did, yes. Before that, you sent me I've got it, the John's Jail Journal. That's got all the address, the times, and also the link over to the Facebook event page for the demo. I'm doing it now. It's gone. It's tweeted out there now, folks, so it's there, all the information about London. Shaun, it's great work that you're doing. Thanks for coming back on this programme. Love listening to you, and you're welcome back anytime. Cheers, Richie. It's been a pleasure. Look after yourself. Bye for now. Shaun Attwood on the line to us there from his home in London.